You're connected to Business Wrap. Find us online at businesswrap.biz, on Twitter using handle AskBizWrap, and on Facebook just search Business Wrap. And now, Michigan Reimagined with Chris Buck.
So a wider variety of housing options is something communities clamor for to remain competitive, to attract new residents, and drive their economy. One housing variety that's becoming a bigger focal point is missing middle housing. And here to talk about the new neighborhood exclusively made up of missing middle housing is the president of TA Forsberg, Mr. Brent Forsberg. Welcome, Brent.
Chris, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be part of this exciting show.
Thank you very much. I want to hear a little bit more before we dig into this specific project. The TA Forsberg kind of philosophy. What does Forsberg as a brand stand for?
Absolutely. So our core purpose is one thing. It's creating the best living and working environments for people. So everything that we do starts with that as the underlying premise when we look at any project, anywhere we're building, and how we engage the local and regional communities that we're a part of.
Okay, so it's not the same old, same old. The way we did it in the 50s needs to keep going on. You're actually modernizing your thought patterns?
Yeah, we're trying to change how people think about development. So if you go back to all the way to the Middle Ages, right? We had the scientific process come out of that. And that gave us knowledge of who we are, and we began to build on that. And really, and it's funny you mentioned the 50s and 60s, because this is where we really started to see what's known as a change of age. Okay. And a gentleman named Dr. Russell Akoff was really into systems thinking and started promoting this, and this idea that we're moving away from creating knowledge to creating an understanding of how we live within the systems that we're a part of. And everything that we're in is a system. You know, our bodies are a system that creates these emergence that, you know, our thought process that comes out of it, transportation systems. So as we're looking at it, we're trying to say, okay, if we start looking at changes in things, we get these unintended outcomes that come out of it when we focus on single policy, single ideas. Say we need to have a more holistic approach to what we're doing and look at how are these relationships defined and what do they mean for future growth patterns. So starting with back in the 30s, we came up with FHA, government-backed mortgages. But we put that to single-family homes, and over time, especially in the 50s, it started growing exponentially to where housing affordability became unattainable for a lot of people. And we're seeing the effects of that in all of our major cities and all of our towns. I mean, that's one of the most prominent conversations, right, is this affordability in housing. But what's the question behind that? What are we really trying to get to when we're asking that? And when we add in the idea of wages and fair wages, and we add in healthcare costs, and we add in cost of living, it really comes down to what is the experience that we want to create, and we want to feel comfortable within the environments that we're living in, because all of this is built and conceived by us as people. So we need to start looking past those individual policies and taking them on one at a time, and how do they all interact with each other, and say, are we just attacking symptoms? Right. Or are we actually looking at the core problems that we've created that have put these issues in front of us?
So I've been doing economic development work for a while and trying to throw my hat in the ring on sharing my brain power to make mid-Michigan or Michigan a more vibrant, economically sustainable place, and reasonably new at it. But it always seems like there's all these separate puzzle pieces that need to be put together. But your equation to your comparison of like a human body and say Michigan or any society is an organism, right? That everything is connected, but whether it's jobs, housing, affordability, healthcare, transportation, all of that needs to be looked at as one master plan almost.
That is a perfect example in using economic development as that master plan idea. Right. Because when we're looking at it and we try to address all these issues, everybody's heard of the butterfly effect. You have these waves that come out. So let's take this idea of FHA housing. And when we look at what we did is they assigned risk to different neighborhoods. And some of the original risk was the amount of minorities that lived in that neighborhood. 75% of the neighborhoods that were redlined in 1934 are still at risk and living in poverty today. That was an outcome that came out of a policy that was based on risk mitigation for banks' default rates. So when we start mapping those and looking at how all of these policies have interweaved throughout time, we can create an understanding of how we got to where we're at now, and then start looking at what's the intended outcome we want moving forward. And some of the ideas that we're looking at, it's that idea of being connected to your community, the emotional engagement. And we're moving from this idea that we no longer are responsible for all of our own life and safety systems, right? The community's doing that in technology. We have food that's part of the logistics system, right? We have healthcare. We have other people building our houses. We don't do all of those individual processes ourselves. So it's allowed us to have more time to build concepts, and that's where we've come up with these new technologies and art and everything else that's come out of that to create this better experience. So we're moving through this kind of change where we're saying, hey, how do we keep doing this, and how can we afford it, and how do we interact within our community? So that's what we're trying to do, is start those conversations, and housing is one of the key pieces of that. And that's what my company does. I mean, I can't change the minimum wage across the entire region, but what I can do is say, is what can we do in housing to make it more efficient and make it so it can become another piece of this cost of living in our stack monthly.
Okay, so let's talk about one part of that then. So Tembo Homes.
Yes.
All right. So, which was really the reason I wanted to invite you in here, but that really kind of frames this out, and maybe we need to start a whole different show. That's just the Brent Forsberg show, because I think we could continue to talk about this all the time. So, an opportunity came up in Eaton Rapids. A little while ago. Why don't you share a little bit about how this project that you're about to completely unveil, or just flat out open and market. I think it's even live now. But anyway, talk a little bit about the history and what we're talking about here today.
Yeah. So the idea of the Tembo Home came from the this idea of this missing middle housing that you talked about at the beginning. And it's a courtyard style development. So the density is a little bit tighter. It allows us more efficient use of infrastructure. And then what we did is said, okay, people, when they're at their house, you want some of that green space around you. And the one thing that kind of takes that away is when we have to pay for driveways and everything else. So we clustered all of that together off the main road, which allowed us for a larger green courtyard in the center. And it was an old trailer park that had been abandoned that went to tax sale, and we worked with Eaton County and purchased it, and have been cleaning up the site, and we have just completed our first 2 homes on site right now, and working on getting it ready for its live opening late fall 2020.
Okay.
So that'll be exciting. Then after that, we're going to have it open as tours for people. We've got the models in there. And then we're also going to set it up that if people are interested in understanding what this lifestyle is. And these homes are based on the 1920s and 30s models of housing and what it was. You know, back then, people had 280 to 350 square feet per person that they lived within. 2016, we jumped that to over 1,000 per person in a house. So these homes are 760 feet. They're the 2-bedroom bungalow style homes, and they've got a lot of smart technology in it. You can run the HVAC and everything from your phone. But we're going to open them up probably using one of the online platforms that if people want to test drive it and stay in it for a few days, you can see, does this lifestyle fit you? Because it's about giving you a lower cost of living to allow you to have more experiences in the community to do other things.
Got it. Okay. So now, how big of a parcel is this? So
the parcel's 1.14 acres. It's pretty compact, and we're going to have a dozen homes on it.
Okay.
And then they're all, the parcel's kind of a triangle shape. This property it's neat. I was talking with one of the neighbors, was the yard for building the railroad that went through Eaton Rapids, turn of the 20th century. So just outside of it are a lot of the old shotgun houses. The ones that were here were taken down, but this was a workforce housing development in its original conception in the city. So it's kind of neat. We're still bringing that piece back in where the houses are going to be similar size to what they were, and then having that courtyard and kind of open green space around them.
So if people were multitasking at this point, listening to this show, is there a website that people could go to take a look at what these houses look like and what the footprint of the neighborhood, we'll call it?
Yeah, if you go to lansingrealestate.com, you can click on Eaton Village. So that's the name of it. And the name Tembo was kind of a fun play, Tembo meaning elephant. Okay. And so the original tagline was a little home that thinks big. So that's how we kind of came up with it. And the symbol using the elephant allowed us to kind of play with that idea of yin and yang and balance. Because that's what this is about, is balancing lifestyle. So
you can put 12 homes basically on about a little more than an acre. And there's shared parking, is that right? So everyone's going to kind of come in and have one almost like a parking lot and then a little pathway that takes you to your actual residence.
Yep. So when you come in, there's 2 parking spots per house, and there is road out front too, so if guests and things are there for holidays. And then it's pathways that are going to go through that'll be open green space. And we've set it up that from the parking lot, you're never more than 150 feet from a door.
Okay.
So it's relatively close when you think about walking around, and it's well lighted and everything. So that way you're not walking a long distance. What it allowed us to do was really cluster that green space. So we set up with kind of 3 different pocket parks inside of this courtyard community. And then there's also a central building that was repurposed from the old washing facility. So they'll have the mail room and spots for Amazon box for secure dropping.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then in the back, we're going to have it open for storage for bikes, kayaks, and all the other type stuff that people have. So that way, again, in your house, you can have more utilization of space for living while you're in there.
So it's funny you mention all of that. Just anecdotally, I'm hearing more and more people talking about simpler life. And I don't know if it's pandemic or if it was even before pandemic. I want to strip things down, live minimalist. You know, boy, I'd like to see, because you've had this home that down in Rio Town that's been live for, it's rented out to a person, right? So you can't go tour it. But people are hearing more and more about this concept, and it seems like people are more and more talking about wanting that. So why is it important now? Like, why are people, have people always wanted this, but there was no option, so they didn't daydream about it? And now that they know it's out there, they're clamoring for it? Or is it something new in our society, do you think?
I think it's been trending for some time in society. And actually, going back to the beginning of society, I think it's always trended. It's this idea of efficiency, right? That we are creating ways to make it easier for us to live. And as we kind of move past that idea of survival, and my friend Cheryl Edison, Edison International, talks about it moving from survival to satisfaction. And this idea that we're changing the mentality of how we experience our communities. Now that we've got health taken care of with sanitation, COVID is a grim reminder of how fragile we really are as a species. And I think what we've seen with COVID is it's accelerated it a little bit. There's a lot of articles right now, the rise of the small neighborhood and walkability again, as shops have adapted to where you walk by their door and they're bringing their goods to the door, so you don't even have to go inside to get food, drinks, things. So we're seeing this kind of adaptation to what we've dealt with COVID, but it's really just accelerating a trend that was already there about how do we have that experience. It's no fun being in your car. Maybe for little drives and things, but if you think about it, I know as a kid, every time there was a traffic jam, the amount of swear words that came out of my dad's mouth while we were sitting there for a few minutes, it was hot, it's sticky, it's just, it's not a good experience for us. So we want to create those experiences, and it's about getting us on feet, and we're a pro-social species. So we want to interact with people, which is what made the COVID pandemic so hard, right? Because we want to interact. That's who we are for most of us.
Right.
So we're finding ways to still do that and make it work.
Okay. All right. So the target audience for this kind of housing option, who are likely to be the suitors for this space? Granted, you only have 12, but you're in the hallway, we talked about there are other, neighborhood types of setups like this that are starting to be built up. So who are the people that tend to sign the dotted line for these types of spaces?
I think you brought it with people that are looking for that simplified living. And that the house, while it's important, it's the biggest investment most of us are ever going to make in our life is our house, right? And the 20th century, house defined the American dream, right? The life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We defined that post-World War II as our housing. Now, that might not be the primary piece, right? Because that pursuit of happiness is there. So we're moving into the idea of experience. So people that are looking for maybe a little less cost but want something nice and comfortable to live in, this is a product that you could walk away from for months if you want to go on an adventure. If you're working lots of hours,
Right.
The yards are taken care of for you. You are responsible for the exterior of the house and the landscaping around it for your flowers and things, but the yard and everything's for the most part taken care of. So if it's really that lifestyle that I want that little bit more time to be able to do things and not work on my yard.
Okay. But I'm guessing probably not people with children. So maybe entry-level folks that are on their way, through life, or maybe empty nesters that are starting to wind down, or?
Yes, you are going to get some of that, and maybe younger children, or even some families. I had talked with one lady. She goes, I raised 3 kids in a house this size, a full family. And we did it well when we were, 30 years ago. So This house was the family home for centuries.
Right. Okay, so we're talking about Eaton Village. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is Eaton Village, lansingrealestate.com. You can find out more about this housing style and the idea of the missing middle housing.
It's fantastic. Brent, it's always a pleasure. We've got Brent Forsberg, the president of TA Forsberg, really trying to reinvent the way we live our lives, which I think is an admirable profession. So thanks for joining me again. I promise I'll see you soon.
Thank you.